I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The confirmation lasted less than a minute, but its impact tore through the palace with astonishing force. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, held the recognized rights to the Queen Mother's treasured brooch. Camilla heard the words, stared across the room in stunned silence, and then rose so abruptly that her chair scraped against the floor. Without offering an explanation, the Queen walked out, and the door closed behind her like a declaration of war. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles watched the closed door while Sophie remained perfectly still. Moments earlier, the keeper of the royal collection had read a formal determination confirming that the jewel belonged to her under an authenticated estate record. The royal collection is the body responsible for caring for historic royal treasures, while a formal determination is a written decision establishing who may possess or use an item. It placed the wishes of the past above the rank and expectations of the present. Sophie lowered both hands into her lap and refused to touch the burgundy presentation case. She understood that the diamond and sapphire piece was never simply decoration. The Queen Mother had worn it during personal appearances tied to family loyalty and wartime endurance, giving the jewel a meaning. Accepting it would honor that legacy, yet the trusted confidant feared it might permanently damage her relationship with Camilla. Camilla had asked whether the decision could be reconsidered. Charles answered that the authenticated record was definitive, meaning its handwriting and dates had been examined and accepted as genuine. His calmness wounded her more than anger might have done. She looked at the king as though he had chosen another woman's dignity over hers, while he struggled to separate his duty as monarch from his instinct as husband. Then the keeper read the handwritten inventory note. The documented account declared that the brooch should pass to the woman who served the crown without seeking greater status. Sophie's face changed at once. Camilla removed her reading glasses, pushed back her chair and said, "Then there is nothing more for me to hear." She walked out before Charles could answer, leaving the unopened case between him and the stunned Duchess. But the silence concealed something worse. As the door shut, Charles noticed a second sealed page beneath the inventory. It explained why the Queen Mother had deliberately prevented any future queen consort, the wife of a reigning king, from claiming the jewel automatically. Camilla's departure had shocked the room, but those hidden words were about to transform wounded pride into something far more personal. To the outside world, Sophie and Camilla had spent years standing on the same balconies, attending the same ceremonies, and protecting the same institution. Behind palace doors, however, they represented two very different paths into royal life. One fought for acceptance beneath relentless scrutiny. The other earned trust slowly, through quiet duty. Now a single heirloom had turned those contrasting journeys into an unavoidable comparison neither woman had requested, but both immediately understood. Sophie built her position through years of understated service, stepping forward whenever the family needed dependable working royals. A working royal is a family member who officially represents the monarch at ceremonies, charitable visits, and public engagements. She completed difficult assignments without demanding greater attention. Camilla followed a far more painful path. Her transformation from controversial outsider to queen consort, the wife of the reigning king, required Charles's protection, careful planning, and years of public pressure. Sophie finally broke her silence when she was alone with Edward. She stared at the unopened case and admitted that the brooch felt less like a gift than a burden. The trusted confidant feared that wearing it would make every future appearance look like a challenge to Camilla. Edward listened carefully before reminding his wife that refusing the jewel could also appear to reject the late queen's trust. He understood why she felt trapped between loyalty and peace. Camilla carried the same pain into her private sitting room. She removed another brooch from her coat and dropped it onto a velvet tray with a sharp movement. When Charles entered, The Queen told him the ruling had made decades of sacrifice feel invisible. She had endured judgment, rebuilt her public position, and stood beside him through the hardest years. Yet one handwritten sentence now appeared to suggest that someone else had served the crown more faithfully. Charles answered through a private conversation, with no advisors present. He revealed that he had not selected Sophie, and possessed no authority to reverse the authenticated decision. The king insisted that defending Camilla by interfering would damage both of them. She heard his reasoning, but the explanation brought no comfort. To the monarch, restraint protected the crown. To his wife, it felt like abandonment when she needed him most. Edward then opened a dated personal account he had preserved from years earlier. It recorded a conversation in which Elizabeth II praised Sophie for helping the family without demanding recognition. The late Queen had spoken of her loyalty twice, making the Duchess realize that the brooch reflected a judgment formed long before the palace meeting. Then Sophie examined the sealed page, a protected document kept closed until formal review. It referred to Windsor, a private luncheon, and a promise witnessed by two women. One witness was Sophie. The other name changed everything. The battle had not begun with the palace announcement. It had begun years earlier, during a quiet Windsor luncheon that Camilla believed everyone had forgotten. Years before the brooch divided the palace, the Queen Mother's jewel appeared at a small Windsor gathering, where no cameras were present and no announcement followed. What happened at that luncheon lasted only a few minutes, yet it created the private promise now controlling the royal family. Sophie remembered every word. Camilla remembered being excluded, and the late Queen ensured that neither memory could ever be dismissed as a misunderstanding. The Queen Mother's death had forced the palace to separate her privately owned possessions from jewels reserved for official royal use. Private possessions belonged to her family estate, while official pieces remained available for duties carried out on behalf of the crown. Some jewels came with clear written instructions. Others depended on household inventories, detailed lists recording where royal objects came from, who used them, and where they were meant to go. The brooch remained sealed because its file contained two conflicting notes. One permitted temporary use by a queen consort, meaning the wife of a reigning king. The other pointed toward permanent ownership by a woman chosen for loyal service. That conflict mattered because wearing the jewel temporarily did not create the right to keep it. Until the true intention could be confirmed, nobody could safely claim it. Sophie remembered receiving a private invitation to Windsor after returning from a demanding overseas engagement. Elizabeth II welcomed her to a quiet luncheon and thanked her for accepting duties that several others had declined. The monarch understood how often the trusted confidant worked without praise, and she wanted Sophie to know that her restraint had not gone unnoticed. Then the late Queen asked for a small burgundy case to be brought forward. Elizabeth II opened it slowly and touched the brooch before speaking. One day, this should rest with someone who understands duty without possession. Sophie did not treat those words as a gift. She offered no request and made no claim. Yet a senior dresser recorded the exchange in a documented household account that same afternoon, noting the exact date, location, witnesses, and words used by the monarch. Camilla learned about the luncheon months later. She asked Charles why the Queen Mother's jewel had been shown without her knowledge, but he could not provide an answer that eased her humiliation. The king insisted he had not attended the meeting and knew nothing of a formal promise. She heard only exclusion. To her, Sophie had been welcomed into a private circle while she remained outside it. Camilla later requested the brooch for a Commonwealth reception, an event bringing together representatives from nations linked through the voluntary Commonwealth Association. Palace custodians refused because the late Queen had ordered the case sealed until ownership could be authenticated. She never forgot that rejection. Years later, Camilla's attempt to release the jewel for a state dinner forced officials to reopen the record. The Windsor account was authenticated, Sophie's rights were confirmed, and the Queen stormed away. What she had dismissed as an old misunderstanding had become enforceable, and she was about to confront Sophie without courtiers, documents, or protocols standing between them. Camilla did not leave the palace. She crossed 2 corridors, dismissed her aide, and waited in a smaller drawing room until Sophie appeared. There were no officials beside them, and no husband present to soften the exchange. When the Duchess entered, the Queen did not offer a greeting. She pointed toward the empty chair opposite her and asked one devastating question. "How long have you known that they intended to give it to you?" Sophie stopped several steps inside the room. She had expected a private attempt at reconciliation, but Camilla stood beside the fireplace, holding the written confirmation from the earlier meeting. The Duchess is a woman who holds a high royal rank through marriage or title, yet no rank could protect her now. The confirmation was the palace's official record of its decision, carrying far greater weight than a spoken family promise. Camilla believed Sophie's presence at the Windsor luncheon proved everything. She accused the trusted confidant of knowing for years that the brooch was intended for her. Palace custodians, the officials responsible for protecting, recording, and managing royal objects, had only recently completed their review, but the Queen insisted that Sophie had possessed the real answer long before them. Sophie chose her words carefully. She admitted remembering the late Queen's statement, but she had never treated it as a formal promise. The Duchess had not requested the jewel, contacted the custodians, or influenced their investigation. Elizabeth II had spoken warmly during a private luncheon. She had not handed over the brooch. Sophie believed claiming ownership before the written record was authenticated would have been deeply improper. Camilla's restraint finally broke. She accused Sophie of hiding behind silence, while the palace transformed loyalty into a competition between them. The Queen said every quiet act of service was now being measured against her painful history. Sophie's expression hardened. She answered that rejecting the documented truth would dishonor Elizabeth II, whose final wishes deserved protection even when they caused discomfort. Camilla placed the confirmation on a table and revealed through their private conversation that she had already selected the brooch for an approaching state dinner. A state dinner is a formal royal banquet held to honor an important foreign guest. She had planned to wear it while celebrating Charles's reign, believing the Queen Mother's jewel would show continuity between past and present. Losing it now felt like losing legitimacy before the family and the country. Sophie offered to keep the brooch unworn. Camilla rejected the compromise immediately. Possession was not the deepest wound. The message was, in her eyes, the family had chosen which woman represented trusted service and which woman remained permanently judged by her past. Charles entered only when their voices rose beyond the closed door. He looked at Camilla, then at Sophie, and asked them both to sit. The king's face carried no anger, only exhaustion. He announced that the ruling rested on an authority even he could not overrule. The confrontation had exposed the wound, but Charles's explanation would reveal why neither marriage, rank, nor royal fury could change the outcome. Kings command ceremonies, appoint senior officials, and carry the visible authority of the crown. Yet inside that private room, Charles faced a power created by the wishes of those who came before him. He could comfort Camilla, delay an announcement, or question the process, but he could not simply erase an authenticated personal instruction. For the first time that day, the king looked less like a sovereign than a husband trapped between love and duty. Charles explained that the crown meant the continuing authority and responsibilities of the monarchy, not merely the person wearing the crown. Even that authority had limits. The Queen Mother's brooch belonged to her personal collection rather than the state regalia, the ceremonial jewels held for official use by the nation. Her family could not treat a privately owned heirloom as though it automatically belonged to whoever held the highest title. Camilla listened as her husband described the documented family settlement attached to the Queen Mother's private estate. That settlement was the written arrangement controlling how her possessions would be handled after her death. Royal collection custodians had compared the note's ink, paper, handwriting, signatures, and inventory references with undisputed records from the same period. Every test led to the same conclusion. The instruction was genuine. Camilla asked Charles to postpone the confirmation until after the state dinner. She did not demand that Sophie's rights be erased. She wanted time to replace the brooch quietly and avoid appearing publicly rejected. The king slowly placed his pen on the table. Any delay, he said, would look like interference designed for his wife's benefit. Protecting her feelings could damage the integrity of the entire decision. Sophie felt their marital pain closing around her. She offered to leave, but Charles stopped her. The trusted confidant was the legal recipient, and he refused to discuss her future as though she were absent. Sophie remained seated, carrying the guilt of someone who had done nothing wrong, yet still feared becoming the cause of another woman's suffering. Charles then opened the sealed second page. The documented instructions stated that the brooch must never automatically accompany the title of queen. That title belongs to a reigning female monarch, or, in Camilla's case, identifies the wife beside the reigning king. The jewel was meant to honor personal constancy, steady loyalty shown over time, not marriage, rank, or closeness to the throne. Then the final notation struck harder. Elizabeth II had written Sophie's name after the Windsor luncheon, confirming her as the intended recipient. The late Queen's handwriting transformed a private expression of affection into a specific family instruction. Sophie lowered her eyes. Camilla said nothing. Charles authorized the custodians to transfer the jewel that evening. When Camilla understood that the case would physically leave royal storage, her anger disappeared into a silence more unsettling than fury. The argument was over in law, but as the brooch changed hands, its emotional consequences began spreading through the family. That evening, a burgundy case was carried from secure royal storage to Sophie's private rooms. There was no ceremony, no family gathering, and no triumphant presentation. Yet everyone understood the meaning of its movement. Camilla had lost the heirloom she expected to wear, Sophie had gained an object she feared would isolate her, and Charles was left watching a personal dispute become a permanent part of palace history. Two custodians delivered the sealed case with a transfer record acknowledging Sophie's personal rights. A transfer record is an official document showing when an important object changes lawful possession and what conditions remain attached to it. The jewel still required strict security and insurance, while any official loan, temporary permission for the brooch to be worn at a royal event, would need to be recorded. Edward witnessed the handover and signed as the family representative. He watched his wife place both hands beside the case, without touching its clasp. One custodian invited her to inspect the contents, but Sophie quietly declined. She had fought no battle and claimed no victory. Still, the trusted confidant felt as though the entire palace expected her to celebrate another woman's humiliation. Sophie waited until the room was empty before opening the lid. The diamond and sapphire brooch carried the weight of the late Queen's trust and the Queen Mother's original ownership. She remembered Elizabeth II praising her quiet service at Windsor, and tears rose before she could stop them. The jewel offered recognition, but it also threatened the family peace she had spent years protecting. Camilla faced a different emptiness. She stood before the outfit prepared for the state dinner and looked at the place where the brooch was meant to sit. The Queen asked her dresser to remove the entire ensemble, then cancelled the fitting. She could not bear to replace the jewel with another piece and pretend the loss meant nothing. Charles sent his wife a handwritten message that evening. The king explained that defending the crown, the enduring authority and duty of the monarchy, sometimes meant accepting a decision that hurt those closest to it. He admitted her pain had wounded him too, but insisted that changing the outcome would have betrayed the same institution they both served. Camilla read the message twice, folded it carefully, and offered no reply. Sophie discovered something beneath the brooch before closing the case. A smaller card carried a final documented instruction from Elizabeth II. The jewel should first be worn at an occasion dedicated to service rather than sovereignty. It was not meant to display power. It was meant to honor people who worked without demanding praise. Sophie decided not to hide the brooch indefinitely. She would ask Camilla to help choose its first appearance. Edward feared the gesture might reopen the wound, but his wife believed silence would make it permanent. The brooch had reached its rightful keeper, but Sophie understood that ownership alone could never restore peace. Only an honest conversation might do that. Sophie found Camilla the following morning in a private garden room, away from advisors and official papers. She carried no jewel case and brought no prepared statement. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then the Duchess did something unexpected. She apologized, not for receiving the brooch, but for failing to recognize how deeply the decision would reopen wounds Camilla had spent years trying to conceal. Sophie had requested the meeting without involving their husbands or palace officials. She wanted them to speak as members of the same family, not as holders of competing ranks. The title of Duchess marks a high royal position, but the trusted confidant understood that titles would only deepen the distance between them. She needed Camilla to hear the person beneath the rank. Camilla remained guarded. She turned away while Sophie explained the card found beneath the jewel. Its documented instruction directed that the brooch first be worn at an event honoring service rather than royal power. The Queen listened without responding, but her silence no longer carried rage. It carried exhaustion. Camilla finally broke that silence during their private conversation. She admitted that her fury had never truly been about diamonds or sapphires. The Queen feared the decision had confirmed something far more painful. Despite standing beside the king and becoming part of the monarchy's highest circle, she might never inherit the family's deepest trust. Rank had given her a place. It had not erased the memory of how difficult her arrival had been. Sophie answered with quiet firmness. Trust could not be transferred through jewelry, and no brooch had the power to declare one woman worthy while condemning another. She reminded Camilla that surviving years of hostility required strength, patience, and discipline. The Queen Mother's jewel could neither create those qualities nor take them away. Sophie then made an unexpected offer. She asked Camilla to choose the charity occasion for the brooch's first appearance. A charity occasion is a public event supporting people or causes rather than celebrating royal status. The trusted confidant made one condition clear. She was not surrendering ownership or questioning the late Queen's instruction. She was inviting Camilla to help decide what the jewel would mean next. Camilla studied her for a long moment. Then she proposed a reception honoring hospice volunteers, people who provide comfort and support to patients nearing the end of life. Their service carried dignity, endurance, and little public praise. The Queen admitted that such an occasion would have pleased the Queen Mother, who had valued duty performed without reward. Sophie accepted immediately. The agreement did not erase their confrontation, but it changed its direction. Pain had finally produced honesty, and honesty had made room for respect. Camilla stopped Sophie before she reached the door. She asked whether they could attend the reception together. The trusted confidant turned back and agreed. Their private truce would soon face public scrutiny, where one photograph could confirm peace or expose every fracture they had failed to heal. By midday, the palace announcement had escaped the boundaries of private correspondence. The public did not merely see an argument over a jewel. It saw a contest involving memory, loyalty, and who truly carried the values of the late royal matriarch. Yet the image that ultimately defined the day contained no confrontation. It showed Sophie wearing the brooch, while Camilla stood beside her, close enough for their shoulders to touch. The palace released a concise public statement confirming Sophie's rights and explaining that ownership had been established through authenticated private records. A palace statement is an official message issued on behalf of the royal household to give the public a clear position. It left no room for argument. The Queen Mother's brooch belonged to the trusted confidant, and the decision would not be reconsidered. Commentators quickly explained the difference between personal royal jewelry and state-held pieces. Personal jewels may be inherited like family property, while state-held items are preserved for official use and belong to the continuing monarchy. That distinction turned a private disagreement into a national discussion about inheritance, service, and whether royal rank should ever outweigh a documented final wish. Sophie feared appearing with the brooch so quickly would seem insensitive. She worried the public might interpret her first appearance as a victory over Camilla. The Queen refused to retreat. She told the Duchess during their private conversation that hiding now would allow anger to become the permanent version of events. If they wanted the truth to be remembered, they had to face the public together. Camilla made that decision real before they entered the hospice reception. The event honored volunteers who support seriously ill patients and their families with comfort and dignity. She noticed the brooch sitting slightly unevenly and adjusted the edge of Sophie's collar. The small gesture surprised the trusted confidant. No apology could have steadied her more. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered around newspaper stands displaying one enormous headline: Sophie inherits the Queen Mother's symbol of service. People expected another chapter of royal anger. Minutes later, broadcasters replaced footage of Camilla's walkout with the reception photograph of both women standing together. Sophie addressed the volunteers during a recorded public speech. She credited generations of women who had served without demanding recognition, turning the jewel away from rivalry and toward duty. The Duchess never mentioned the dispute. Instead, she looked toward Camilla as the audience applauded, and the Queen answered with a quiet nod. Camilla spoke to Charles after they returned to the palace. She admitted in that private conversation that storming out had been wrong, but confronting the pain behind her reaction had been necessary. The king listened without interrupting. Then he told his wife that public peace mattered, but private honesty had to come next. The public had witnessed reconciliation, but Charles knew the final verdict belonged to the family. Away from the cameras, they still had to decide what the brooch and everything it had exposed would represent from that day forward. The final outcome did not change. Sophie retained the Queen Mother's brooch, the palace record remained untouched, and Camilla never again challenged the ruling. But the deeper verdict reached beyond ownership. One woman learned that receiving a symbol of trust required humility. The other discovered that losing that symbol did not erase her place beside the king. The jewel had divided them for one extraordinary day, and ultimately forced both to confront truths rank had allowed them to avoid. Charles gathered Camilla, Sophie, and Edward for one final private conversation. The king confirmed that the transfer was complete, and no appeal would be pursued. An appeal is a formal request to reverse an official decision, while the palace record is the permanent written account preserving that decision. Edward listened as the monarch made clear that the brooch would remain with his wife. Sophie agreed that the jewel would be worn mainly at events celebrating voluntary service, care, and national resilience. Voluntary service means helping others freely, without seeking payment or praise. The trusted confidant wanted to protect the purpose written on the card beneath the brooch. Edward supported her decision, knowing she had chosen responsibility over personal display. Camilla then acknowledged during the private conversation that storming out had transformed private hurt into a palace crisis. The Queen apologized directly to Sophie, admitting that anger had made her treat the inheritance like a judgment against her entire life. Sophie accepted the apology without pretending their confrontation had caused no damage. Forgiveness could begin healing the wound, but it could not erase what had been said. Sophie closed the Burgundy case and assured Camilla that she had never viewed the inheritance as a contest. The jewel, she said, should remind the family of its responsibilities. It should never decide which woman mattered more. The Queen heard no triumph in those words, only the quiet loyalty that had earned the brooch in the first place. Charles then revealed the final truth by reading from the Queen Mother's documented instruction. Her decision had never been designed to reject a future consort, the husband or wife of a reigning monarch. The note was meant to stop status from overpowering character and ensure that unseen duty received visible recognition. The king finally understood that the jewel had not been withheld to punish Camilla. It had been preserved to honor Sophie. Camilla publicly supported Sophie's ownership and never sought the piece again. In return, the trusted confidant refused to wear it as a symbol of superiority. She chose only occasions connected to courage, care, and service. Sophie had secured the legal right, but Camilla achieved a quieter victory. She faced her insecurity without allowing it to harden into lasting bitterness. The monarchy became steadier because the past was honored without destroying the people living in the present. The palace door that closed in anger eventually reopened through honesty, leaving the Queen Mother's brooch exactly where it belonged, and its lesson permanently engraved upon the family entrusted with the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.